He was about to learn that when you trade love for power, you lose them both. Chandeliers hung like constellations over the Grand Eden Hotel ballroom, their crystal arms catching the light in 1,000 fragments. The air was rich with perfume, laughter, and the faint clink of champagne glasses. His tuxedo was custom-tailored, his smile wide and confident. She was not the kind of woman the city's elite expected to see on the arm of a rising executive. She laughed loudly, unapologetically, her cheeks flushed with champagne. To many in the room, she seemed out of place among the sequins and diamonds. "Isn't Mason's wife pregnant?" "Who is she?" "That's Tasha Carrington, Victor Carrington's daughter." And there it was. Tonight, those rumors crystallized into reality. In her place stood Tasha, clinging to Mason's arm like a declaration of war. "To new beginnings," he said smoothly. The quiet school teacher who had supported him from the shadows, the woman who had given up her career for his. Some pitied her, others scorned her weakness, but Mason didn't care. For him, Lena was already erased. Later that night, in a quieter corner of the ballroom, Mason leaned close to a colleague, his voice dripping with smugness. "You see this," he gestured to Tasha, who was laughing with another guest. "She is my ticket to the top. The future of Mason Hart isn't in my wife's belly. It's in Victor Carrington's empire." Mason didn't notice, or rather, he didn't care. What Mason didn't realize was that the bridge he thought so sturdy was already cracking beneath his feet. Because while Mason smirked and preened, Victor Carrington himself had arrived. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, silver hair gleaming under the lights, his presence commanding silence. He simply watched. The television flickered silently in the background, the evening news replaying images of the gala. Her hands trembled as she caught a glimpse of Mason with Tasha. The apple pie she had baked earlier sat untouched on the counter. She had once thought Mason loved it, loved her, loved the life they had built together. He had traded her in for a future she could never compete with. Her hand rested on her belly. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I'm sorry, little one. I thought your father would choose us, but he already chose his empire." Back at the gala, Mason clinked glasses with Tasha, smiling for the cameras, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He thought he had won. He thought abandoning Lena and flaunting Tasha was a victory. But the city was already talking, already judging, already questioning. Just a year ago, she had been a woman of quiet dreams and simple joys, content with the life she was building with Mason. She wasn't wealthy, and she certainly wasn't chasing power. What she wanted was far more ordinary and far more profound, a home filled with love, laughter, and the sound of a child's footsteps on the floorboards. She grew up in a small Midwestern town, raised by her mother after her father disappeared before Lena could remember his face. Lena watched her mother's hands crack from soap and needles. Yet those same hands always had the strength to hold her tightly when life hurt too much. From her mother, Lena learned 2 lessons. She carried those lessons into adulthood, putting herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. She wanted to shape futures, just as one teacher once shaped hers. He wasn't extraordinary at first glance, a young man in a crisp shirt, ordering coffee in the diner where Lena worked nights to pay for her books. But he had confidence. Mason made her laugh, left her notes scribbled on napkins, and waited outside her shift with his car parked under the dim yellow streetlights. Within 2 years, they were married. The ceremony was modest, white roses borrowed from a neighbor's garden, a second-hand lace gown passed down from Maria. But Lena didn't care. Mason whispered it against her ear that night, and she believed him. Lena put her teaching dreams aside to support Mason's career. When he grew impatient, snapping at her for little things, she told herself stress was to blame. She loved him enough to excuse the cracks. When she found out she was pregnant, Lena felt as though the universe had given her the missing piece of her soul. She pressed her palm against her belly every evening, whispering promises to the little life growing inside. But Mason did not share her joy. He compared her to the women at Gala, slim, glittering, childless, and resented the quiet strength of the wife who once stood by him through every storm. Lena noticed. But she convinced herself he would come back to her. She was wrong. "Lena, you don't fit the life I want anymore. Tasha does. She comes from power, from a family that matters. You're just ordinary, and I can't build an empire with ordinary." The words hollowed her out. Mason packed a bag, kissed her cheek like she was nothing more than a neighbor, and walked out. In the weeks that followed, Lena tried to piece herself together. The baby's kicks reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. But loneliness seeped into her bones like winter frost. The newspapers, the gossip columns, the photographs of Mason parading Tasha across ballrooms, whispering about the power couple of tomorrow. But what Mason never understood was this: Lena was not weak. Yes, she broke down in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she tried to cook a dinner she couldn't eat. She barely recognized herself. But then her baby kicked hard, almost defiantly, and she realized she didn't have the luxury of breaking. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered, "I won't let him take us down. I promise." But it was now joined by something fiercer: resolve. Mason had written her off as ordinary, but he had no idea that ordinary women often carried the most extraordinary strength. And when Lena learned the full truth about Mason's betrayal, she would discover that the power to end him was already in her hands. The city was a place of contradictions, where glittering towers of glass touched the clouds, while shadows of forgotten alleyways swallowed the desperate below. It was here, in this metropolis of power and illusion, that Mason Hart believed he could reinvent himself. He wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder anymore. It was Tasha Carrington. By attaching himself to her, he thought he had found a shortcut into Victor Carrington's empire. And nowhere was this duplicity clearer than in the grand galas that lit up the city like jeweled crowns. These galas weren't just parties. They were battlegrounds disguised as celebrations. Fortunes shifted with the clink of a glass, and reputations were built or destroyed in a whisper. The irony was sharp. To them, she was out of place, the odd jewel in a flawless crown. Not when her father was Victor Carrington. But across town, the other side of the world existed. Her apartment was small, modest, with peeling paint on the kitchen walls and second-hand furniture bought with careful budgeting. The nursery she had prepared was simple but full of love. Lena survived in warmth and simplicity. Lena's child and Tasha, both carrying futures Mason believed he could manipulate for his own gain. When journalists whispered about his pregnant wife, he dismissed them with a smirk. "She'll manage. I've moved on." His words, laced with arrogance, rippled across newspapers and gossip columns. Strangers glanced at her belly, whispering, pitying, some even judging. Instead, she paid for her groceries quietly and walked home with her head high, even as her heart broke inside. The city itself seemed to mock her. Advertisements flashed designer brands he draped on Tasha. Meanwhile, Lena counted every dollar, worried about medical bills, about diapers, about the future she would have to provide alone. And the center of that storm would be Victor Carrington's empire. He watched Mason's antics with growing fury, his silence not approval but calculation. He loved his daughter, flawed though she was, and while he disapproved of her recklessness, he would not allow a parasite like Mason to turn her into a tool. Victor's empire was not one Mason could buy into with charm alone. The city would soon learn that Mason's gamble trading a loyal wife for a wealthy mistress was not a triumph, but a death sentence. Because in this city of two faces, the quiet wife and the loud mistress were about to become the keys to Mason's downfall. To those who first met him, Mason was charming. He knew how to shake a hand firmly, how to flash a smile that seemed sincere, how to make promises he never intended to keep. He could sell confidence the way a con artist sells dreams. From a young age, he envied those who had more, nicer cars, bigger houses, powerful fathers who opened doors their sons barely had to knock on. She was gentle, devoted, and willing to sacrifice her own dreams so that he could chase his. But as soon as her belly grew, as soon as responsibility overshadowed glamour, Mason began to see her differently. To him, Lena represented the life he had fought to escape, simple, modest, ordinary. And Mason wanted extraordinary. That's when Tasha Carrington appeared. To the world, she was easy to mock, too loud, too heavy, too brash. But Mason didn't see Tasha for who she was. He saw the last name, Carrington. He saw the key to an empire worth billions. He didn't love her. He didn't even desire her. But he understood the power she represented. If he could marry Tasha, he wouldn't just be a man climbing ladders. He'd be a man who married into the very family that built the ladders. With one reckless gamble, he could bypass years of struggle and crown himself a king. So Mason made his choice. He filed for divorce from Lena, abandoning her while she carried his child, and walked into galas with Tasha on his arm. Every laugh he gave her, every kiss on the cheek, every whispered promisette was all a performance. A show for Victor Carrington to prove that he was worthy of the empire. But Mason underestimated two things: Victor's ruthless intelligence and Elena's quiet strength. Behind closed doors, Mason's true nature was crueler still. With Lena, he mocked her simplicity. "You'll never understand this world," he sneered once, waving a glossy magazine of business tycoons. "You're content with pennies while I'm chasing millions." He reduced her love to weakness, her sacrifices to burdens. With Tasha, his cruelty was subtler. He showered her with attention in public, but in private, he rolled his eyes at her laughter, ridiculed her insecurities, and reminded her that she was lucky to have him. "Do you really think men line up for you?" he once hissed when she questioned his late-night absences. "Without me, you'd still be hiding in your father's shadow." Mason thrived on control. He believed women existed to serve his ambition, Lena for stability, Tasha for power. But arrogance breeds blindness. And Mason was blind to the storm he was stirring. What made Mason dangerous wasn't just his betrayal. It was his shamelessness. He didn't hide the affair, didn't try to protect Elena's dignity. He flaunted Tasha publicly, parading her in front of flashing cameras while Lena wept in silence at home. Mason wanted the world to see. To him, humiliation wasn't collateral damage. It was strategy. And yet, Mason's greatest crime wasn't abandoning Lena or exploiting Tasha. His greatest crime was the one he thought no one would discover. In his desperation to appear wealthier than he was, Mason had forged Elena's signature on a series of financial documents. He funneled money through her name, disguising fraud as joint investments. If his scheme ever collapsed, Lena would take the fall while Mason slipped free. He saw her as nothing more than a shield against accountability. This was Mason, a man who betrayed his wife, exploited his mistress, and gambled his own child's future. All for the illusion of power. But illusions never last. At the gala, when Victor Carrington's icy gaze cut through the ballroom, Mason's mask cracked. His smirk faltered, his palms sweated, his eyes darted. For the first time, the man who believed himself untouchable realized he had walked into a cage built by his own greed. Still, Mason convinced himself he could win. He told Tasha that her father would forgive, that Lena would fade away, that the city would forget. He whispered lies as if repeating them could make them true. But Victor Carrington wasn't a man who forgot, and Lena wasn't a woman who stayed down. Mason believed he had secured his empire, but what he had really done was light the match that would burn everything he ever built. And when Mason finally faced Victor in private, he would hear words that shattered the illusion of his control forever. The night of the gala was supposed to be Mason's crowning moment. He had spent weeks rehearsing lines in front of mirrors, perfecting his smile, choosing the right tuxedo. Tasha wore an emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her hair styled in loose curls. Together, Mason believed, they would silence every whisper, every doubt. Tonight, the city would see them as the new power couple, the heirs to the Carrington name. The ballroom glowed with golden light. Waiters in crisp white jackets served champagne while cameras flashed like lightning storms. Investors, journalists, and politicians mingled, each one a witness to Mason's carefully staged performance. He clasped Tasha's hand firmly, guiding her through the crowd with a grin that never reached his eyes. "Smile," he whispered under his breath. "They need to see strength." Tasha obeyed, her laugh echoing too loudly across the marble floor. She wanted to believe Mason loved her, wanted to believe his touch meant more than strategy. Deep down, though, she felt the unease. Her father's shadow loomed large, and Mason's eyes never seemed to rest on her. They scanned the room for opportunity. Then, as the orchestra played a waltz, the doors to the ballroom opened. A hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned, and there she was. Lena. She wore a simple navy gown, her belly round and unmistakable beneath the fabric. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale but steady. Every step she took into that glittering hall was a step of defiance. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to remain hidden, forgotten, erased. But Lena had come. The whispers exploded instantly. "That's Mason's wife. She's pregnant. Didn't he file for divorce already? Oh my God. Both of them are carrying his children." Mason froze, his grip on Tasha's hand tightening until she winced. The cameras turned, abandoning him and Tasha for Lena, who now stood at the center of the ballroom, her presence a silent accusation. For weeks, Mason had controlled the narrative. He was the ambitious man moving forward, Lena the relic of his past. But tonight, the truth could not be hidden. 2 women, 2 pregnancies, one man's arrogance laid bare. The journalists surged, microphones flashing. "Mr. Hart, care to comment?" one shouted. "Who is your rightful family? The wife or the mistress?" Mason tried to recover, plastering a smile on his face. "This is not the place for personal matters," he said, his voice strained. "We are here for the children's charity, not gossip." But the irony was too much. A reporter called out, "Then why abandon your own child for charity?" Laughter, gasps, murmurs. It was chaos. Lena stood silently, her hands resting on her belly, her eyes meeting Mason's across the hall. There was no hatred in them, only quiet strength. That strength made him sweat more than any insult could. And then, Victor Carrington entered. The room shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. The orchestra faltered. Even the waiters froze mid-step. Victor's silver hair gleamed under the lights, his broad shoulders commanding space no one dared to challenge. He walked slowly, deliberately, his cane tapping against the marble floor, though he did not need it. Mason straightened, forcing a smile. "Victor," he said too loudly. "I'm glad you're here." But Victor's eyes never moved to Mason. They went first to Lena. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable, then gave the slightest note a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. Then his eyes shifted to his daughter. Tasha's smile faltered. "Father," she whispered, but he did not respond. His gaze finally landed on Mason, and it was colder than ice. Victor requested the microphone from the host. No one refused him. The room fell into silence as he stepped onto the stage. "Tonight," Victor began, his voice deep and steady, "we gather to honor children, to build a future for them. But how can we speak of futures if men cannot even honor their own children?" The words struck like thunder. Mason's face drained of color. Victor continued, his tone sharp as steel. "It has come to my attention that a man in this room believes he can discard his pregnant wife and flaunt another woman as his prize. This man believes he can gamble with lives for his own ambition. He believes he can use my daughter as a stepping stone into my empire. Gasps rippled across the room. Tasha's eyes widened, tears filling them. Mason grabbed her arm, hissing, "Stay calm," but his own voice trembled. Victor's gaze locked on Mason, unblinking. "You, Mason Hart, have humiliated not just your wife, not just my daughter, but the very idea of family. And for that, you will pay." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Investors whispered furiously. Some guests clapped at Victor's words. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Mason tried to shout above the noise. "This is a misunderstanding. I love Tasha. Elena means nothing to me anymore." But that was his final mistake. The words echoed through the microphones, recorded by every journalist in the room. He had declared, in front of the world, that his pregnant wife, the woman who had given him everything, was nothing. Elena's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin higher. She refused to break. Not here. Not now. And then, in the midst of the uproar, Victor stepped down from the stage. He walked directly to Elena, the crowd parting for him as if he were Moses splitting the sea. He stopped in front of her, placed a firm hand on her shoulder, and whispered words no one else could hear. Elena's eyes widened, her lips trembling. Because in that moment, Victor revealed a secret that would not only destroy Mason's ambitions but also change the course of Elena's life forever. The night of the gala replayed in Elena's mind like a cruel film she couldn't switch off. Everywhere she turned, in newspapers, on TV, even whispered in the aisles of grocery stores, her name was tangled with Mason's betrayal. Strangers who had never met her dissected her pain as if it were entertainment. When she returned home from the gala, she didn't speak. She simply closed the door behind her, slid down to the floor, and sat in silence. The navy gown clung to her as if mocking her attempt to hold dignity in a room that had devoured it. Her belly pressed forward beneath the fabric, a reminder that she was carrying a life Mason had already rejected. For days, she hardly left her apartment. Curtains stayed drawn. Meals went uneaten. The nursery she had lovingly painted felt like a cruel joke now, the sunflower curtains bright and cheerful in a room filled with despair. She would sit in the rocking chair, cradling her belly, whispering apologies to her child. "I wanted us to be a family," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I thought love was enough. I was wrong." The pressure mounted inside her. At night, she tossed in bed, jolted awake by nightmares, Mason laughing as he walked away, Mason tearing her baby from her arms, Mason's cold words echoing, "You mean nothing." Her body began to suffer under the strain. Her ankles swelled, headaches throbbed behind her eyes, and her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. At her doctor's appointment, the physician frowned and said firmly, "Elena, stress at this level is dangerous. You must rest. You must find peace, for your sake and your baby's." But how could she rest when her world had collapsed? Meanwhile, Mason's face was plastered across headlines: businessman humiliated in scandal, 2 women, 2 pregnancies, 1 man's arrogance. Elena couldn't escape it. Every headline was a fresh cut. Every photo of Mason with Tasha was a reminder of her replacement. She told herself to be strong, to rise above. But strength felt like a distant memory. She wept over dishes in the sink, over a half-cooked dinner, over the quiet ticking of the clock. The apartment became her prison, filled with ghosts of what her life was supposed to be. One evening, a storm raged outside. Thunder shook the windows. Rain pounded the glass. Elena sat on the bathroom floor, her knees pulled to her chest despite the swell of her belly. Her sobs were swallowed by the sound of rain. She whispered into the darkness, "Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't our love enough?" Her reflection in the bathroom mirror was almost unrecognizable: pale skin, hollow eyes, trembling lips. She barely saw herself anymore. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up. She almost ignored it, convinced it was another cruel headline or a pitying text from someone who didn't understand. But something made her reach for it. The message was brief, from an unknown number. Mason does not love my daughter. He is using her. Meet me. You deserve to know the truth. Her breath caught. The initials at the end froze her blood, VC. Victor Carrington. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Victor was a name that commanded fear across the city, a man who crushed empires with a single decision. Why would he reach out to her? The woman Mason abandoned? The woman his daughter despised? She dropped the phone onto the counter, pacing the small bathroom. Could she trust him? Or was this just another trap? Another manipulation in a game too big for her to understand? Her baby kicked sharply, as if demanding her attention. Elena pressed her hand to her belly, tears spilling down her cheeks. You deserve the truth, the message had said. And deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and despair, Elena knew it was true. Mason's betrayal was bigger than she had realized. There were lies she hadn't uncovered, secrets she hadn't been told. She couldn't keep living blind to them. But fear rooted her in place. Victor Carrington was ruthless. He wasn't a man to approach lightly. If she stepped into his world, there would be no going back. The storm outside raged harder, lightning flashing across the sky. Elena stood in the bathroom doorway, staring into the darkness of her apartment, the choice looming before her. She could stay here hidden, broken, forgotten, or she could step into Victor's world and uncover the truth Mason had buried. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Carrington Tower. Come alone. Elena closed her eyes, her body trembling with fear and resolve. Because tomorrow, she would step into Victor Carrington's world, and nothing about her life or her child's future would ever be the same again. The Carrington Tower loomed above the city like a monument to power. Its glass walls reflected the morning sun, blinding and beautiful, yet intimidating in their perfection. Elena stood at the base of it, her palms damp with sweat, her heart pounding as if it wanted to escape her chest. She clutched her purse tightly, her other hand instinctively resting on her belly. She felt so small here. A school teacher's daughter, an abandoned wife, a woman who had been made into a headline. What was she doing walking into the lair of a billionaire who could destroy reputations with a phone call? But the text had been clear. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Carrington Tower. Come alone. So, here she was. The receptionist greeted her politely, but with a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Elena knew she must have seen the scandal splashed across the news. Still, she said nothing, simply directing Elena to the private elevator that led straight to the top floor. The doors opened to an office unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire wall, offering a sweeping view of the city. The furniture was sleek but understated, dark wood, leather chairs, a single painting of a stormy sea. And behind a massive desk sat Victor Carrington. He didn't stand at first. He simply studied her with piercing eyes that seemed to see through every layer of her being. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, commanding. Elena Hart. She swallowed hard. Mr. Carrington. Sit. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather chair across from him. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she tried to hide it. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, watching her as if measuring her worth. Then, finally, you have been humiliated. The bluntness stung, but Elena didn't flinch. Yes, she whispered. You've been betrayed, he continued. Yes. And yet, you walked into this tower anyway. His eyes narrowed slightly. That tells me you are not as weak as Mason believed. Her throat tightened at the mention of Mason's name. Why am I here, Mr. Carrington? Victor rose then, moving to the window. His broad shoulders cast a shadow across the room. Because Mason Hart is a fool. He thinks he can use my daughter as a pawn, and in doing so, he has insulted me. But more than that, he paused, he has placed you in danger. Elena frowned. Danger? How? Victor turned, his expression dark. Mason has been moving money through fraudulent accounts. He forged signatures, falsified contracts, and used your name to shield himself. If the law uncovers it, you will take the fall. Her blood ran cold. My name? He used me. Victor nodded grimly. Yes. On paper, you are the guilty party, not him. Elena's stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. Betrayal was one thing, but to discover Mason had not only abandoned her but also tried to ruin her, it was almost too much to bear. Victor's voice cut through her spiral of panic. That is why you are here. You need to understand the truth. Mason never loved you. He never loved my daughter. He loves only himself, and he will sacrifice anyone to feed his hunger for power. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She refused to let Victor see her break. Why are you telling me this? Why me? Victor's expression softened, if only slightly. Because you are the key to destroying him. Mason believes you are broken, forgotten. He does not realize that you hold the very evidence that can end him. He returned to his desk and slid a folder across to her. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were copies of contracts, bank statements, and signatures. Her signature, faked in neat, practiced strokes. Her vision blurred with rage. He signed my name. He made me his scapegoat. Victor nodded once. Exactly. And if you do nothing, he will bury you with his sins. Elena's heart pounded. She thought of her child, of the life she wanted to build. Mason had already stolen her peace, her dignity. She could not let him steal her future, too. Victor's gaze was sharp as a blade. You have a choice. Walk away, and Mason wins. Or stand with me, and we destroy him together. Elena stared at the folder, at the proof of Mason's betrayal laid bare. Her tears dried, replaced with something fiercer. For the first time in months, she felt fire in her veins. What do you need me to do? She asked. Victor allowed himself the faintest smile. First, you need to decide who you are. The abandoned wife Mason discarded, or the woman who will make him regret underestimating you. Elena drew a deep breath, her hand resting protectively on her belly. For her child, for herself, for every sleepless night of shame, she knew the answer. I will not be his victim, she said firmly. Not anymore. Victor's eyes gleamed. Good. Then listen carefully, because Mason's time is running out. And when Victor revealed the first step of his plan, Elena realized she was about to become someone Mason would never see coming. The morning after her meeting with Victor Carrington, Elena stood before the mirror in her small apartment and barely recognized herself. Her reflection was tired, pale, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. But beneath the exhaustion flickered something Mason had never seen in her, determination. She had been broken, yes, but she was not finished. Victor had given her a choice, and she had made it. She would not remain Mason's victim. She would rise, not only for herself but for the child she carried. The transformation began quietly. Victor's assistant, Claudia, appeared at Elena's door with garment bags, makeup cases, and a team of stylists. Mr. Carrington asked me to prepare you, Claudia said curtly, though her eyes softened when she saw the modest apartment. If you're going to fight Mason, you can't walk into battle looking defeated. Elena hesitated at first. She had never cared for fashion or glamour. But when the stylist draped a tailored gown across her shoulders, when they brushed color back into her cheeks and styled her hair into waves, something inside her shifted. For the first time in months, she looked at her reflection and didn't see a discarded wife. She saw a woman capable of standing in the spotlight without flinching. But the transformation wasn't just physical. Victor arranged for Lena to meet with lawyers, advisors, and even media coaches. She learned the details of Mason's fraud, studied the documents he had forged, and prepared herself for the inevitable storm. At first, the information overwhelmed her, pages of numbers and contracts blurring together. But she forced herself to learn, to understand, to reclaim control over the life Mason had tried to manipulate. She practiced speaking with confidence, her voice steady, her words sharp. She learned how to answer reporters without crumbling, how to tell her story without sounding like a victim. One afternoon, she sat across from Victor in his office, rehearsing. "Say it again," he instructed. Lena lifted her chin. "Mason Hart betrayed me. He forged my name to cover his crimes. He thought I would break, but I won't." Victor studied her, then nodded. "Good. But remember, Lena, this isn't just about punishing him. This is about reclaiming your life. Speak not with anger, but with conviction." She took his words to heart. The press had been hounding her for weeks, desperate for a statement. At last, with Victor's guidance, she agreed to one interview. It wasn't with a tabloid or gossip magazine, but with a respected journalist who valued integrity. Lena appeared in a soft, flowing gown, her hair simple but elegant, her hands resting protectively on her belly. When asked about Mason, she didn't lash out. She didn't cry. Instead, she looked directly into the camera and said, "A man can abandon his wife. A man can abandon responsibility. But he cannot erase the truth. My child and I will not be silenced." The words reverberated far beyond the studio. They went viral within hours, shared across news outlets, social media, and talk shows. Women across the country reached out with messages of support. Some wrote, "You spoke for all of us who have been betrayed." Others said, "You reminded me that I can stand again, too." For the first time since Mason left, Lena felt something other than despair. She felt purpose. Meanwhile, Mason's empire crumbled. Investors withdrew, partners distanced themselves, and Tasha, once his ticket to power, began to see the truth. The whispers behind closed doors grew louder. Mason Hart was not a visionary, but a fraud. Lena didn't revel in his downfall. She didn't need revenge. What she needed was to reclaim herself. And with each passing day, she did. She walked into Carrington Tower no longer as a frightened woman seeking answers, but as a partner in a mission. Victor introduced her to influential allies, not as Mason's abandoned wife, but as Lena Hart, the woman who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger. At one charity luncheon, she entered the room in a navy dress that flowed like water. Conversations hushed as she passed, but this time the whispers were different. "She carries herself like royalty," one guest murmured. "She's stronger than I expected," another whispered. Lena heard them but didn't flinch. She walked taller, her hand resting on her belly, her child a symbol not of weakness, but of resilience. At home, she opened a box of old teaching certificates and letters from students she had once taught. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were of recognition. She had given up her dreams for Mason, but now she realized she could rebuild, not just as a mother, but as herself. Late one night, as rain pattered against her window, she whispered to her unborn child, "We're stronger than he ever believed, and soon he'll know it." Victor agreed. One evening, as they met to discuss strategy, he told her, "You've risen, Lena, but Mason still thinks you are weak. He needs to see you as you are now, and the world needs to see it, too." "How?" she asked. "The next gala," Victor replied. He will be there, desperate to salvage what's left of his reputation. You will be there too. Not as his abandoned wife, not as a victim, but as the woman who has already won. Elena's heart pounded. The thought of standing in the same room as Mason again made her stomach twist. But deep down, she knew this was her destiny. She had hidden long enough. Her transformation was nearly complete. She was no longer defined by betrayal, but by the strength she had forged through it. And at the next gala, Elena would step into the spotlight, not as Mason's shadow, but as the flame that would burn his empire to the ground. The Grand Eden Hotel shimmered once again, its chandeliers casting golden light across a sea of polished marble. Another gala, another night of power and spectacle. But this time, the whispers before the event were louder than the music. Everyone knew what tonight was about. Mason Hart would be there, desperate to claw back what remained of his reputation. And Elena Hart, the wife he discarded, was rumored to attend as well. The city buzzed with anticipation. Would she hide? Would she confront him? The crowd arrived not just for charity, but for blood. Mason appeared first, striding into the ballroom in a sharp black tuxedo. His smile was wide, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The scandal had worn him down, his once perfect image cracked. Still, he clung to Tasha's arm, dragging her into the light as if her presence alone could legitimize him. She looked uncomfortable, her gown glittering too brightly under the cameras, her hand pressed protectively against her swollen belly. Reporters surged. Mr. Hart, how do you respond to the allegations? Are you still married to Elena? Which child will inherit your name? Mason raised a hand, pretending calm. Tonight is not about personal matters, he said smoothly. It's about building futures. Let's stay focused on what matters. But no one bought it. The room smelled blood. And then, the doors opened again. Elena entered. She wore a crimson gown that flowed behind her like fire. Her hair was swept back, her eyes steady. The swell of her belly was visible, but instead of weakness, it radiated strength. The crowd gasped as cameras exploded in flashes. Elena did not shrink. She walked with dignity, her hand resting protectively on her child, her chin lifted high. She was not the abandoned wife anymore. She was a queen reclaiming her throne. The whispers surged. She looks magnificent. She's stronger than ever. Mason's finished. Mason's face paled. His smirk faltered as he gripped Tasha's hand tighter. Ignore her, he muttered, but his voice trembled. The evening unfolded in tension. Speeches were made, music played, but everyone's eyes were on the inevitable collision. When Mason was called to the stage to deliver his address, his voice cracked under the weight of silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that my commitment to this city is unwavering. Despite rumors. Rumors? Elena's voice cut through the hall like a blade. She was standing now, every eye turning to her. Calmly, deliberately, she walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for her, whispers like a rising tide. Mason froze as she mounted the steps, her gown shimmering in the spotlight. She faced not him, but the audience. For weeks, you've heard whispers. Tonight, I will show you the truth. From her clutch, she pulled a folder. Her hands were steady, her voice unwavering. These are documents Mason Hart signed with my forged name. He funneled money through false accounts, using me as a shield for his crimes. He didn't just betray his wife, he betrayed the law. Journalists surged forward, shouting questions. Mason lunged for the folder, panic overtaking him. Mason froze, trembling. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted over one another. Mason stumbled, his face ashen. He looked to Tasha for support, but she stepped back, her eyes wet with tears. Is it true? She whispered. Did you ever love me, or was I just a tool for you? Mason stammered, reaching for her, but she pulled away. Her words cut deeper than any headline. Lena turned to him at last, her voice calm but lethal. Mason collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, his empire gone. As Lena stepped off the stage, her dignity restored, she knew that Mason's punishment was far from over. But her victory wasn't about his fall, it was about her rise. Victor's words, "Your child will never carry Mason's stain," echoed in Elena's mind long after the gala ended. The evidence Lena revealed was irrefutable. Authorities moved quickly, and the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery stacked against him like a mountain too high to climb. Victor arrived later, his usually stern expression softened by a surprising tenderness as he gazed at the child. "He will grow up free," Victor said quietly. She was a survivor. Tasha gave birth to a daughter weeks later. The verdict, guilty on all counts. As he was led away in handcuffs to serve a long sentence, Elena felt only closure. Mason Hart was a forgotten cautionary tale. Elena, with Victor's support, had built a new life, not of glamour, but of purpose. Her story became an inspiration. She discovered a passion for art therapy and worked with children at Elena's foundation. One sunny afternoon, at a park fundraiser for the foundation, Elena stood on a small stage. Her son Leo played nearby with Tasha's daughter, Lily. "Strength isn't about never breaking," Elena told the crowd, her voice clear and confident. Later, as the sun set, Elena and Tasha sat on a bench, watching their children chase bubbles across the grass, their laughter filling the air. They were free. They were strong. But as the philosopher Seneca once said, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. The very pain that tries to destroy you can become the fuel for your greatest comeback. Elena's journey is a mirror for anyone who has ever felt left behind, underestimated, or broken. She chose not to remain a victim. She chose to stand, to fight, and to build a new life on her own terms. In that choice, she found her true power and her freedom. If you felt a connection to this story tonight, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need this reminder of their own resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We're healing, we're rising, and we're reminding each other that no matter how dark the night gets, the sun will always rise again. The best chapters of your story are still ahead.